Okay, joining us now, Adam Liptak. We don't have to get into the name calling that President Trump just did, but I do, Adam, want to start with you. Neil Katyal tweeted something on Saturday talking about Section 122, which the president is trying to use at this point. He argued the case. He wrote, "Seems hard for the president to rely on the 15% statute, Section 122, when his DOJ in our case told the court the opposite." And he adds a quote in here. "Nor does 122 have any obvious application here, where the concerns the president identified in declaring an emergency arise from trade deficits, which are conceptually distinct from balance of payments deficits." I help people understand, because that is what the president now is utilizing.
Right. So in court, the administration says that the emergency they declared under the 1977 law they used there, IEPA, was conceptually distinct from what they're now trying to rely on, Section 122, and I apologize for all the legal jargon.
That's okay.
And it's true, because the old law addressed balance of trade, which is arguably in place. The new law that they're relying on is a different concept. It's balance of payments. It's the entire economy of the two nations. And while there may be trade deficits in places, most economists will say that the balance of payments is in favor of the United States. So these are not only distinct concepts, but the concept that president is now relying on is factually problematic. So we not only have a concession on the part of the administration that this different authority is problematic, there's also a factual predicate, which is probably wrong. So we can expect litigation on this point. And also point out, even if he's right that he can use this, it's time limited. It's good for 150 days, and then he has to go to Congress.
And he probably won't. So
right. He probably won't. So, Akela, I want to come back to the name calling. That was in the intro, because it was extraordinary. Even for this president, it was extraordinary to hear him lambast the Supreme Court, and particularly the Supreme Court justices who decided against him. And I'm thinking of, Barrett and Gorsuch. But he also appointed Kavanaugh. And my bigger question is, does he really think that the justices he appointed to the Supreme Court and the 6-3 conservative supermajority, that they are his justices, and that accounts for the anger we just heard in that opening intro?
One clip you guys didn't play, he also said that their families are an embarrassment to them. But certainly the way that the president was talking about this, and I was in the room on Friday, is that he believes that these justices should answer to him. He said these justices are, quote, barely invited to the State of the Union.
To be clear, he can't invite nobody. He does not invite
They are welcome to come if they please. And it's been a controversy over the years whether justices should go to the State of the Union. It's ultimately been up to them. But they are absolutely going to expect to get those attacks in person when President Trump delivers that State of the Union. And it's going to be tempting for him because they're going to be sitting front row. And he's been very clear that the focus of that speech is the economy. And he believes that tariffs are so central to how he views the economy. This is something that I think it's important to understand. President Trump has been so consistent on, even before he ran for president. He's changed his policies on gun control, abortion. He's changed his thinking on so many different political issues. This is the one thing that he has not changed. He is so adamant that he believes that the U.S. needs a very aggressive tariff policy. And we saw him do that yesterday, upping these tariffs to 15%. I was frankly surprised that they were at 10% to begin with, because he always had seemed to believe that 15% should be the floor. And now he's really pushing this legal statute to its full limit.
I want to stay on this topic because I don't think that we talked about it enough yesterday. But, Adam, in your deliciously titled piece that published yesterday morning in the paper version, and when you read Adam Liptak, you always read to the bitter end. I have this kicker here circled. You quote a very presciently phrased report from Chief Justice Roberts, where he wrote at the end of 2024 on the state of the federal judiciary that attempts to intimidate judges for their rulings in cases are inappropriate and should be vigorously opposed. public officials certainly have a right to criticize the work of the judiciary, but they should be mindful that their intemperance in their statements when it comes to judges may prompt dangerous reactions by others. Can you speak more about this and how Justice Roberts is feeling and what the other judges feel about these very personal attacks?
Well, I think what he was addressing there was attacks on lower court judges. But as you say, I think he's quite prescient that this kind of talk could actually endanger U.S. Supreme Court justices. And we saw that after the Dobbs decision, where someone went to Justice Kavanaugh's house saying they intended to assassinate him. And this kind of talk is not just political rhetoric. This is dangerous business.
Kayla, when you look at a lot of Republican lawmakers that we have talked to, that you've talked to, I'm sure, over months, have been like, we really hope the Supreme Court does this because we don't want to have to fight him over these tariffs.
Yeah.
When you kind of, as they move forward, and President Trump is going to continue to do the tariffs, despite the Supreme Court throwing him a lifeline and saying, we're getting rid of them, you can back out of this. In the White House, are there people around the president who are trying to convince him that, like, find another avenue, or is it so deeply ingrained in him that they don't even think it's worth it?
Well, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick of Commerce, they have been sort of seen as people who have their ear to the ground when it comes to Wall Street and have tried to kind of tailor the approach more when it comes to President Trump. Publicly, it doesn't. Their remarks don't suggest that, but that's what we understand privately. But again, this is something that President Trump believes that he needs to push forward. But we saw just yesterday he pulled his endorsement from Colorado Congressman Jeff Hurd, and I think that's something that we're likely to see more of. But when I talk to voters, the idea that tariffs have impacted the economy, that they have had inflationary effects with many economists agree, that is absolutely something that's permeated the public psyche, and Republicans are aware of that. They're aware of the fact that this is going to have a potential midterm impact, and we saw that vote in the House when it came to the Canada tariffs, and I was frankly surprised that more Republicans didn't vote against it. You had the whole delegation of Iowa, where farmers are very upset about these levies. They still voted for them. So I think that the fact that Republicans potentially aren't publicly saying that they're against them, I think a lot of them privately still feel like this is a win, the president should take it, and they're very closely watching potential legal challenges to come.
And I'm curious, again, coming back to your piece that Jackie read from just a moment ago with the great headline, the Supreme Court's Declaration of Independence. Is this just a one-off? Or do you think that the Supreme Court, like this Declaration of Independence, is a harbinger of things to come, that the president should and his administration should anticipate the court not being as in seemingly lockstep with it as it has been on this first year?
Well, we saw over the past year maybe 20 emergency decisions going in the direction of the Trump administration. So the court sure looked like it was in the bag for Trump. Then one of the last of these on the deployment of the National Guard in Illinois goes against Trump. We now have the first argued decision, merits decision, big case, the tariffs case going against Trump. There's good reason to think that birthright citizenship, another big Trump commitment, is going to go against Trump. I have reason to think that his attempt to remove Lisa Cook, the Fed governor, is going to fail. So we are looking at a court that may well be a counterweight to the president in a lot of areas. Now, not across the board, but unlike Congress, I think this branch of the government is going to start to play a significant role in keeping the checks and balances alive to some extent.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up on the court? Previously, the swing vote was Justice Kennedy.
Yeah.
Who is it? Justice Amy Coney Barrett? Is it Justice Kavanaugh? Sometimes they sometimes are the ones who sometimes will go and rule with the liberal wing.
Well, with Kennedy, you had a 4-4 split and Kennedy in the middle. Now you've only got 3 liberals. They've got to pick up 2 votes. That's typically going to be Roberts and Barrett or Roberts and Kavanaugh. You might imagine a Kavanaugh-Barrett situation, but I mean, the math is that it's an uphill climb for the 3 Democratic appointees because they've got to pick up 2 votes. Back in the day when there were 4 liberals, they'd only have to pick up Kennedy, which they do about a third of the time.
Right.
Michaela, before we're out of time, you pressed the president on refunds on Friday.
Yeah.
He was fairly dismissive of that. Is there any pressure on them to actually commence the refund process? And do you have any indication that this White House and this administration actually has sort of the wherewithal to carry out a refund process?
Well, what's interesting is when I asked the president this, he essentially said, well, the Supreme Court didn't give us guidance. He gave a non-answer, essentially. But he says, we're going to be in court for the next 5 years. So to me, that suggests that they intend to oppose companies that file for refunds. But I just spoke to yesterday the CEO of Flexport. He represents many companies, and he says 22 companies signed up for their services just on Friday alone because they intend to recoup all of the money that they have paid in tariffs. There's electronic records of all of these payments, so companies know exactly how much they're potentially owed. But it certainly sounds like they intend to impose any company that tries to sue. But this is a decision that is ultimately going to be up to the lower courts. But the Justice Department actually said in the Court of Appeals that they believe that they would have to give this money back if these tariffs were found to be invalid. So let's see if the administration follows through with that.
Adam, the president is saying that the Supreme Court didn't tell him to do it, so then he's not going to do it. Does the Supreme Court, because it's a more of a bureaucratic question than a legal question, the refunds, right? It's like the process has to work itself through the administration doing it. So would it be abnormal for the Supreme Court to say, and do the refunds and do them like this?
It would be abnormal.
Right. So he's saying using that, but it's not a...
The court answers the question before it, and it lets lower courts address other questions. But the music of the decision is these tariffs are unlawful. If the tax is unlawful, you give the money back.
Right.